If you've lost the joy because you're too busy buying all the watercolor supplies, watching all the YouTube tutorials like movies, and comparing yourself and your watercolor supplies with others, then this video will be perfect for you. Because in this video, I'm going to continue showing you how you can remove the overwhelm and frustration and really rediscover joy in your watercolor painting journey. In my last video, I helped you to remove the overwhelm and help you get started with watercolor painting when it came to your watercolor supplies. And in this video, I'll help you to not only start setting up your desk for success, but also show you a super fun and easy way how you can play with your colors that is super fun and relaxing. And you don't need to be born with any special drawing talents or anything like that, because watercolor painting is simply another skill that everyone can learn. So by the end of this video, you will not only set up your watercolor space for success, and I'll share super simple but super effective tips and tricks how you can do that, but you will also have 3 beautiful watercolor paintings that you can explore and really make your own. And it's super easy to create. I didn't do anything special to it, but you'll see how easy and fun it can be, and I hope you will join me. So let's get started. Now, before we even start painting, let's minimize the stress and overwhelm when it comes to our desk, because what most watercolor beginners do, they usually place all the supplies in different areas of their desk, and they have to go around to get the water and paint from different spots of the desk. And what happens is sometimes when you load up your brush with paint and then you need water, you kind of move around your actual painting and you might splatter some of the paint. And then you just get frustrated and annoyed and, all the bad things. And one trick how you can avoid all this frustration is by placing all your liquidy and everything that's liquidy onto your right if you're painting with your right hand, or on the left side if you're painting with your left hand. This means that I have, for example, because I'm painting with my right hand, I have my 2 jars of water on the right side. So I have it here. Below I have my paints. And I also have my mixing palette here, so whenever I load up my brush with water or paint and mix anything, it's all here. Instead of me mixing here, the water is here, and then you kind of move around your painting, and this is where all these accidents happen. And I also have to control the water, or the paint. I also have a tissue paper right below my mixing palette and my paints, but you can also use a cloth or anything else that you might prefer using. And it's also best to always prepare whatever you need in advance, so you don't have to, during the painting process, go grab something that you forgot. I mean, sometimes it can happen, that's totally fine, but having your main tools like your brush, any other tools that you need. I have my bigger brush to apply my paint. I have a round brush for applying the paint and for some details. And if I need even more details, I can, or like a brush that's even better for details, I can use a smaller brush as well. And I have all my supplies linked in the description box below, so you can check it out. And also I have a guide to watercolor supplies where I really talk about the importance of supplies and what to look out for, so you can really make a confident and really educated decision when you buy your watercolor supplies. The second mistake I see a lot of beginners make when they're just starting out, they either afraid to use their supplies, so especially watercolor paper, or they are afraid of the white sheet of the paper because it's just such a massive, space to paint on. Today I'm going to use my Sanders Waterford watercolor paper cold pressed, and it's 100% cotton. I like to use cold pressed because it's so versatile. You can create texture in your painting. You can also paint wet into wet, because I found that hot pressed watercolor paper just doesn't work for me. It can work for some more detailed work where you don't want any texture of the paper to be in the way, but if it doesn't really work for the things I usually paint, like landscapes and wet into wet, so this doesn't really work for me. So I like to use cold press. It's very versatile. It doesn't have that much texture that, you know, it would be super in the way. And just because your watercolor sheet is this size doesn't mean you have to cover everything in paint, that you have, that this is the space for your whole painting. And especially when you're afraid to kind of use the good paper and you're not familiar with it yet, it's best to divide the paper into sections. Now, I wouldn't do it necessarily if you paint just like some illustrative elements like flowers and just little details, because you don't necessarily have to, you know, divide it into squares or use tape for that. You can really just use the space and practice. And today I'm going to use tape. So this is some masking tape for artists that I bought on Amazon. I mean, it's not for artists that paint watercolors, it's just for, you can also use it for your wallpaper, I guess. And I'll just use it to apply to my paper here. Now, you don't necessarily have to, especially here on top. I just like the white frame, so that's why I'm taping it on top, on the bottom, on the sides, and then I will divide it into three columns, so I have 3 spaces to play around with paint. So this is how it looks. I have three columns where I can paint, but you can also divide it into another. You can add tape in the middle, so you have even like 6 squares to work in. But today I will use those 3, and we will use it just to play with colors. I think one of the mistakes people do when they start watercolor painting is that they are just so overwhelmed. Like they choose a reference image and they want to practice, and they just get lost. Like, should I paint this? Should I paint that first? And how do I do this? And then just the thought of planning ahead and thinking about what you need to do is so overwhelming that you might not even start painting because it feels like too much effort and too confusing. That's why I believe setting an intention before you start painting is so important, because if you sit down to paint with an expectation to create a masterpiece or to copy the reference, then you might end up being frustrated because you're so attached to the outcome that you completely neglect just having fun and exploring this medium and really getting to know your paper, your paints, color mixes, and things like that. Today I will set the intention just to play with my colors and really see how I can blend them together, what colors I can mix together, what I can create. I start with bigger areas, so you don't want to really start with details and then paint the background. Usually it doesn't really work in watercolor, so you want to start from light to dark and from big shapes to small shapes. And I'll start with big shapes, meaning I will start with the background. And to play around with colors, the best way or the best subject is skies. So I will play around with different colors and create different skies, and then I'll see what sparks during this process. And I think it will be fun to actually paint sunsets in different stages of the day. So this is one of the ways how you can really explore your watercolors. Pick one idea that you have. For example, you want to paint a sky, and play around with different colors. How would you paint it during certain times of the day? The next step to really making sure you're not stressed and not overwhelmed during the painting process is you really want to prepare your paints in advance. And better to have more than too little, because if you run out of paint during the painting process and then you get stressed that, oh, everything starts drying and I still mix my paints, then you will just feel super stressed and overwhelmed by, okay, but should I do this first or that? And then you completely lose track of what was your intention during your painting session. So for my first column, I will use purple colors and orange. So purple and orange, a super nice contrast. I have a whole guide to watercolor mixing, color harmony. You can find a link in the description box below, where I talk about like color combinations and what colors go well together. So in this case, I will start with purple and orange. For purple, you want to use red and blue, but specific reds and blue. I will use first a pinkish red. So this will be, for example, acrylacron rose, or for example, magenta or carmine red, something like that. and it really works well with ultramarine. And again, I have in the guide to watercolor mixing, I explain why those colors work together. So check this out. And I will use lots of water for now. And you might see that I'm really messy when it comes to mixing colors, because I don't want to rinse my brush and then have too much water on it. I rather mix my colors, and then at the end I can clean everything. So I'll go for pinkish purple, so I need more pink than blue. So we have this nice purple color. And I might add a little bit of water later, and water, a little bit of blue, just to make slightly more purplish, bluish purple. And then on the bottom we will have orange. So I actually might need to mix a little bit more. I'm afraid I'm running out of the paint. Next, we will mix an orange, yellow orange. Make sure your brush is super clean. We don't need to create muddiness in our orange. So I have 2 jars of water. And then I'll start with, you can use, for example, any warmish yellow color. So you can use cadmium yellow, you can even lemon yellow. You will just need to mix a little bit of red to it. So I can use this yellow right here, a warmish yellow. Anything that you have, so it doesn't really matter what colors, exactly what's the name of the color here. Put more water. And I will mix a little bit of red to it. If you have orange already, you can just use orange. I just usually tend to mix my own colors. More red. So we have now a more orangey red. And I can add more orange later on the paper. Okay, first things first. I'll use my big brush and apply a wash of clean water. And it's important that you only apply enough, not so much that everything just swims. And I also like to place a tape behind my watercolor block, just so the water moves into one direction, not everywhere. So I'd have everything slightly more under control. Okay, if everything starts drying too fast where you live, you can totally let the paper absorb some of the moisture and then go back with more water on top, so the water goes a little bit deeper into the fiber. And I'm just also removing some excess moisture around, so I don't want pools or anything like that. Evenly applied, everything is glossy and shiny. Then I'm going to use my bigger brush, and I'll start with any color. You can start from top to bottom or from bottom to top. For me, it's easier to start from top to bottom. So I'll start with my purple color, and I move my purple somewhere here, and then it becomes on the lower third orange. So I'll start at the top. And all the way down. I'm just using my brush and move it up from left to right. And fade it out downwards. Now I have a little bit too much water in my tape gathered, so I need to remove it before I let anything dry. Otherwise it will creep into my drying wash of paint. Clean my brush, and then I will just blend out the rest with just a little bit of water. That's why it's good to use a good brush can hold a lot of water, otherwise you will feel like you have to go constantly load up your brush with more paint and water, and while you do that, some areas start drying. So here I need to remove some of the water because it runs into my paint. Okay, and then on the bottom, I'll make sure my brush is clean first, and then I'll start with my yellow. And here I can turn my paper around and start again as if I'm painting from top to bottom. That's why it's good to use watercolor blocks or loose sheets of paper that are taped down to some waterproof board, so you can really move your your paper around. Here this can be mixed together because we use a relatively pinkish purple. You don't create any muddiness here. If it was slightly more blue, then this could be an issue, yeah. Maybe a little bit more yellow. And I believe I'll also add a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue on top, just to make the purple slightly more bluish. And I'll use ultramarine just straight from the pan, because I don't need to pre-mix it in the mixing palette. I can just use it straight on the paper. A little more. And you can see that everything just is mixed on the paper immediately. And if you use good paper, you can see that you don't really have to do anything crazy or special to mix your colors. The paper just pretty much does everything for you. You just need to make sure that you don't add too much water when things start drying. And I just noticed I wanted to actually move the sky slightly lower, but that's fine. So I wanted to have the purple slightly lower, but I think that's also good. We have a little bit more space for the ground. Now, before everything starts drying, or before I let it dry, I make sure I remove any excess moisture around my tape, because this will just run into my paint and create these blooms. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We are just playing around with mixing colors. And also move the paper a little bit. And then just let it dry. Because if you mess around too much with it, it will be just very, overworked and pale in the end. Okay, well, the first section is drying. Let's focus on the next one. Here the day will be even like later, maybe a different season. And I'll make it more like a greenish blue with orange also. I think this is such a beautiful contrast as well. For that, I will use a little bit of my greenish blue. So this is a cool blue. If you watched my previous video about minimizing your watercolor palette and how to just combat overwhelm, so you can see this is a more turquoise blue compared to ultramarine. And I will use that to mix with a little bit of lemon yellow. If I add a little bit of lemon yellow here, it becomes this slightly greenish blue color. And I think this is such a beautiful color, especially when it's like in the evening. During winter, I've seen this a lot, or during fall, the sky is slightly greenish, so I will use that. So first I'll add my cerulean blue. It could be Prussian blue, it can be any other blue that is in your set that is slightly more greenish. And I add a little bit of yellow to it. And also a little bit more pigment, because you always want to have more paint than too little. So something along this line. I think this is a pretty color. So it's a slightly greenish blue now compared to the first one. And then I will just reuse my other yellow that I already have here. And again, I'll start with a wash of water first. The important part here is that if this is still drying, you don't want to splatter any water on it, because I might have added a little bit of drop of water here and it kind of become this little star. So before you start painting the right side, you might want to dry the left column first, just to make sure you don't actually drip some splatters of water there. And then I'll start with my green color again on top. And do the same thing. Go from top to bottom, left to right. Just fading it out, just using pretty much just the water on my paper. You can see I didn't mix enough, so I need to be very quick. And you might ask, so why is she not using a flat brush for that? I used to use a flat brush, but when I started using better round brushes, I realized I can do so much with them, and I have a little bit more control, I feel like. Because if it's a flat brush, I feel like everything looks very, I don't know, streaky or rectangle-ish when I apply it. A round brush blends nicely with everything around, if that makes sense. Here, this yellow can be mixed into the blue nicely to create a slightly greenish blue, which are really pretty. This is where you really don't have to be afraid to mix greens or anything like that when it comes to skies. Especially now, we're just playing around with different mixes. Even if it turns in complete muddy green or anything like that, it's still a beautiful green, and it can work really well. So don't be afraid to create a mess. It's about playing. Okay, I think that's good enough. I mean, technically I could accidentally paint it inside my other painting, that's fine. So now the blue turns into a slightly green and the green turns into a nice orange, so perfect. So don't be afraid to experiment. Now the last section would be something like the next stage, so it becomes slightly darker and more bluish, because now the sky turns into a more blue sky. And here I will just just create a little bit more of this color that I already had here. So again, my cool blue, greenish blue. And then I'll add a little bit of yellow. And also, don't be afraid to make your colors dirty. You can always clean them. Let's check if this is the same color. Kind of pretty much the same, just slightly darker now because I have slightly more pigment. And then on top I'll use ultramarine. So again, I'll start with my wash of water. And then I can just really just start straight from the pan. I don't have to pre-mix my blue. Oops. And on the bottom I have my greenish blue, and I can just paint straight like that. I mean, I can turn it around and the green can actually move into my blue. Well, it's not necessarily a green, it's still a greenish blue. That's it, maybe. And I feel like making this slightly greener here. But you also don't want to mess around with it too much, otherwise you mess around with the pigments too much, and then I feel like it looks a little dull in the end. And if you wonder, like, why are her colors do the colors look so vibrant? It's really about using good paper. You don't even have to use any fancy paints, not necessarily, to make your colors look vibrant. If you just use good paper, it will automatically dry much stronger. It's just so much fun, so much more fun to paint when you have good supplies. And it's not about being good enough to be able to use them. It's right from the start, I would suggest to use good supplies. Like for swatching your colors, you don't necessarily have to use good paper. You can use some leftover paint, some good, some bad paper that you still have somewhere that you never use, or the backside of some old painting that you don't need. It's really, you don't need to use your good paper for color swatches. Okay, everything's evenly applied. Now we can use the hair dryer and quickly dry everything. So everything's completely dry. All right, now everything's completely dry. And I really like how these turn out, not because they look perfect. I think this is not the goal we're after, because especially here, I think I messed around too much by blending the colors back and forth and kind of, you know, added a little bit more water somewhere, maybe by accident. But I actually really like how this turned out, because this looks more like a cloud by itself. And it's just such a cool thing where when you paint something and then it reminds you of something, and then you can continue this idea. I think a lot of beginner artists, like I did the same thing. I was so focused on a perfect gradient, a perfect everything. But who says it needs to be perfect? How boring is it if it looks perfect? Like you can create this gradient in Photoshop, and so what? So I think you can definitely just play around and make it even like more lively, because I feel like having this a little bit more unevenness, it makes it a little bit more alive than a perfect gradient that you can generate in Photoshop. So definitely don't be afraid to just play and create messy mixes, I don't know, just play with it. Don't aim for perfection, because perfection is boring, and we want to have life in our painting. And life comes through imperfections, with areas where you can see where you worked on, and things that happen during the painting process. And it's not very lively if everything is just perfect, in my opinion. Let me know in the comments how you think about that. All right, now that we have the background, now we can use it to play with our supplies even more and just explore what we can paint. So I wanted to paint different skies, so I could definitely continue with the idea of clouds. So for example, in different stages, different clouds, and maybe add some, maybe some ground here. It could be a mountain, it could be an ocean or something like that. So let's start with the clouds first. So here I will have for my clouds, because the sky is pinkish purple, yeah, reddish purple and orange, I can use those colors for my clouds, so it doesn't compete with each other, and I don't have weird colors like black that might not fit in this mood that I want to achieve. So what I will do is I simply use the colors that I already have. Make sure my brush is clean. I don't add any blue or something, green to my purple. And then I will just play around with the way I paint my clouds. So maybe add a little bit of blue to it. And you can really play around with, because it's wet on wet, we will get these harder edges, so it won't be a fuzzy look. But you can really just, I like to paint them as croissants sometimes, like have a wider area in the center and then get smaller and smaller towards the edges. You can do that. And from the other side. So really, really expressive, you can do that. It doesn't have to be wet on wet. Add a little bit more water here. And I'll make it in a like a circular motion. And because I have a little bit more water in my paint, it's a little transparent, so it looks as if the light shines through my clouds. Maybe actually add a little bit more pigment. So now it's maybe a little too transparent. I'm just dabbing on these little clouds. And you're just playing with colors. We're not playing with realism here. And then I will go in to my orangey color here. Maybe add a little bit more pigment to it so I don't run out. and add it somewhere here. So it looks like now the sun is shining on the clouds. Get a little bit more water. Even use a little bit of water and blend some out, just a little bit, or actually I can use a little bit more yellow towards the horizon. So we have this transition from purple to orange to yellow here, and maybe even here just a little bit. It's very pale, and maybe blend it out a little bit with water. So just really have fun with colors, and not necessarily how to make it super realistic. Just you want to capture the atmosphere, the colors, and see what color combination sparks the most joy. Even add a little bit of yellow to my purple clouds, why not? You can also add a little bit more blue to it if you want to make it, no, actually, never mind. I will use, I just wanted to make it slightly darker, but not just blue. I also need pink. But it's best to not mess around too much, otherwise you will regret your decisions. Can add just a few of these on top, just some transparent ones. Okay, I think that's enough for now. No, I kind of still want here to be something, so actually maybe I can go in with another cloud here. Yeah, I think that's a little better. Sometimes it's all about just playing around with placements also. Okay. Next stage would be here. We can let this dry for now. Here I will add, we can just reuse the colors that we already have. So we have this greenish mixture, just need more pigment here. And I'll add a little bit of blue to it, ultramarine blue, just to make it slightly more bluish, because the sky kind of turns into this blue later, so you can add a little bit of that blue into the mix. But again, you can mix any colors you want, it doesn't have to be the ones I mix. It's about playing with colors and seeing what colors you like. And it's okay if you paint and then you don't like the colors you chose, then you learn something new. This is a complete win, and that's why we paint and explore and see what works and what doesn't work. The more you paint, the more you discover what you like, what works, what doesn't work. Can use some water to blend some out. And kind of use the leftovers and the leftover water to mix everything here. I think it creates such nice cool textures. So don't be afraid to just create a whole mess, because you never know what cool things you can create. Just dabbing on my random clouds here, but it's still like, even like the water, how it pushes and creates these blooms, it's actually super cool. This can be some leftovers. And we can definitely also use some of the pink, or not pink, the orange that we used earlier, and blend this in into our collection of clouds. Even into the green. Let's be super adventurous here. So it's a slightly more abstract, which I really like. Sometimes when something is super even, I like to make it so messy, because we tend to want to paint everything super even and perfect, and it makes it a little too unnatural. So trying to be messy on purpose is actually what I'm going for sometimes. Something along this line is actually super cool. I like the blooms, I like the mess. Perfect. Okay. Just removing some of the hard edges here, just to blend everything together nicely. Okay, next we have our blue sky here, and here again we can just reuse what we already have. And this is this pinkish purple, so I can just use that and add a little bit more blue, because our sky is blue, so I think this works really well. So bluish purple. It's always good to have a swatching paper so you can clearly see what you're mixing here. A little bit more water. And again, the same. I will start with some messy croissants flying in the sky. And then with some water, I'll try to kind of make it a little bit messy. Yeah, so you have my permission to be messy today and feel good about it. here I will blend this a little bit out. Can actually add a little bit of my green colors here also. Now let us dry everything, and then we can continue and finish our paintings. All right, this is how it looks. I love how it glows. I love the colors, how messy it is, and we really just added blobs to the paper and kind of like mixed them together randomly, and you already have some expressive, fun cloud and sky. Perfect. So, and I think this is also an important thing when you, especially when you're just starting out, to really train yourself to look for the good in your paintings, because we're always so used to just pointing out all the flaws, like everything is not, this is not good, this is not good, I wish this was better, this is wrong, instead of looking for the good things, because we never really realize how good we have, how good something is, how fortunate we are, how how good a painting is actually looks, because we're so focused on little details that might go wrong or went wrong in our opinion. So look for things that you're proud of and you really like and celebrate that, instead of just looking for what is wrong here, what can I bash myself for. So yeah. All right, so next step is, you can keep it the way it is like that, or we can add a little bit more foreground. You can easily do that with mountains or add water to it, whatever you prefer. I think I will add a little like mountain area right here, just to create a water scene. I think looks really nice with the skies we created. And again, I can just reuse whatever I already have. And I think I'll use a smaller brush. So an orange, for example, or actually we can use purple. Or actually, let me see how this looks. So somewhere around here. So I divide it into half and half into another half. So somewhere around here. If you're worried it's not, straight, you can place a piece of paper like that. Just use it as a ruler. I mean, my paper is probably not straight either, but it helps a little. Maybe even blend it out a little bit. The water here. Very, very simple, nothing crazy. You can also add a little bit more red to it, like a warmish red. just to have some variety here. If you want to make it even glowier, you can kind of like lift some of the pigments here in the center, because if you have hard edges, usually they look a little too cut out. If you have a softer edge, it looks like your area glows. Uh-oh, kind of messed this up. Oh, that's fine. And the same here, you can add a greenish mountain, or also a bluish, or just keep it the way it is here, or I think it would be beautiful to have a silhouette of a city or something like that. I'm just reusing the blue that I already have. Maybe create a small window somewhere. Could be like a house, and it reflects the sunlight. So you can really get creative with that and paint whatever you feel like painting. It doesn't have to be what I'm doing here. And this could we make purple. I still have lots of purple here. Actually, we could combine the two colors here, because you can create leftovers, for example, to create a mountain in the back. I'm just using the leftovers. Maybe there's some trees poking out of the mountain just by pressing my brush against. Again, just being very messy here. And I just needed to let it dry. Once it's dry, I can go in with my purple and create, for example, it could be trees on the bottom. If you can paint like pine trees. I mean, I'm not even trying to make them, I'm just messing around with my brush. It can be random blobs. Maybe some of them look like trees, a little bit more detailed. But you can also just add your brush, the tip of your brush, like pointing upwards. And you also have tips of your brush of trees. And you can also make a little bit more, add a little bit more pigment to it, so it's not super pale in the end or transparent. Here on the bottom, so I'm going straight into my palette and then add the pigments on top. Okay, I think that's enough. I mean, you can really go crazy with this, but I think having 2 rows, I think it's already enough. And one thing I think always makes the painting even more prettier is having a little bit of stars or a moon or something like that. Birds, you can add birds to your paintings. So for example, I use a relatively small brush and some leftover paints to add some birds, maybe here. So orange on orange. Just a few. They're barely visible because this is very lit by sunlight, so you don't want to add ones that are like black here. They're slightly covered by the sun, so that's why they're relatively orangey light and small. Here the same. I'll do. I mean, you can totally do whatever you want, so I don't feel like you need to follow what I'm saying here. I'm just making them slightly orange because it's like they will be covered in orange light. And here I can make them blue or just reuse some of the colors I have here. Just some dots. All right, and then stars with white gouache. Now, when you use white gouache, you always want to make sure it's opaque, so it's not halfway semi-opaque, it's really fully opaque. So titanium white, for example, if it's zinc white, it can be relatively transparent. So you want to make sure it's really opaque. And you also want to mix it with a little bit of water, but just enough so it's a little bit more fluid, but not so watery that when you sprinkle your stars on top, everything will just be transparent. So I'll cover my painting a little bit. Use a little bit of gouache and water. And I tap onto my brush, not just gently, but actually like with a little bit more force. So I actually release some of the stars. That maybe here on. I mean, you don't necessarily have to add those. I feel like it just adds a little bit of fun. Also make them slightly paler if it's too strong, for example. I want them to be slightly more, you know, if you have variation between pale white and strong white, I think this is also nice. So having like some stronger stars and some darker, lighter stars. And now you can remove the tape. I think it's everything. This is what I want to add. Literally, you can play around with however you want, add all the details, but the goal was to have fun, explore the colors and be messy, and should really train ourselves to look for the good in our painting and setting intention and having fun. I think we sometimes forget to have fun. Once we start learning something new, we kind of get caught up in making something look perfect, be good at something, instead of just enjoying ourselves. And this is it. Now, if you want to finally learn how to paint with watercolors, or you want to finally get back to your creative side and use watercolor painting for that, then I invite you to join me inside my Paint to Paper challenge that is happening very, very soon, where we not only really get curious about our supplies and how we can use them and paint a beautiful painting together, but we will also tap into the creative mind and how you can really set yourself up for success in your watercolor journey, but also in your life. So I hope you will join me. You can find a link in the description box down below. Until then, make sure to watch the video right here, and I'll see you in my next video. Take care.